Imagine if you were able to watch your great-grandparents tell stories from their lives. What made them laugh? What moved them? How they responded to adversity and triumph? And what impacted their existence? That would be a treasure. Now you can offer that gift to your loved ones. Hello, I'm Dennis Tardon. For more than 45 years, I've been a professional interviewer documenting the lives and times of hundreds of people. I will guide you or your family member through the important stories of your lives using my unique interviewing skills. I'm now offering my legacy interviews worldwide via Zoom from the comfort of you or your loved one's own home. All you need is a webcam, and I will do the rest. Contact me today to schedule your legacy interview.
Hello, hello, hello. Here we are almost matching.
Yeah, I give up.
We are here for part two.
In our closets at the same
Yeah,
time.
we always like sync it together. Okay, so I want to get into it because I know we're going to have a lot of comments and there's so much conversation to have. This is part two of Paul Guyot.
They asked for it. They get it.
They asked for it. They demanded it. They needed it. And you're going to see why in just a second. And our third co-host, we needed this many to wrangle the genius of Paul. And it's Manny Zamora, who we're actually doing a table read tomorrow for one of his screenplays. Awesome. How exciting is that? So I'm going to bring Manny Zamora on right now. Hello, Manny.
Hello.
Hello. We are here to begin the conversation with Paul. I see the people coming in, the live audience, but we also want to greet our replay squad. We haven't.
That's right.
Thank you very much. And please subscribe and follow at Cosmos Creative TV. This beautiful woman here, she keeps everything up to date. She has all the social media, all the clips. You can find it, and you can find all those little tidbits of clips and everything to stay totally at the forefront of everything that we're doing here at the Cosmos, right, Em? But you're on mute, so I love the virtual world because you're on mute. That never happens in real life, although I wish it would. I wish I could be talking to someone and they just mute.
I know, right? David said, I feel like MM is belittling Manny with her shoulder pads, but there aren't any. Look, they're like just little.
I have the shoulder pads today, and so that's why I'm all I'm very beefcake right now in this coat. I'm in
now
here.
I kind of feel like I want them. Looking at yours, yours has more structure.
Yeah. This is like a 1980s looking,
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so let's bring on the man of the hour. You know him, you love him, you may have read his book. If you haven't read Kill the Dog, please go to Amazon, type in Kill the Dog, Paul Guyot. Don't worry, he loves animals. He says that at the beginning of the book. He supports animals. Don't actually kill the dog, but read the book called Kill the Dog. And let's bring him up right now so that we can get right into it. This is Paul Guyot, the screenwriter and author, everybody.
Hi, Paul.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Manny.
Hello.
Yeah, Manny was in the audience last time, and now he's a co-host.
I'm here.
Congrats on your promotion.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
It's
live
amazing.
and in person.
Yes, I want to do the first question right out of the gate because I want to say that Paul talks a lot in his book about voice, finding your voice. He's very strong on that. Voice trumps almost everything. You know, in Paul's estimation and in his advice, it's like, you know, structure exists and formatting and all of that. But if you don't have voice, you really kind of don't have anything. And to me, that's the cornerstone of all art. And I wanted to say, Paul, that when we interviewed you the first time, I hadn't read the book. So I didn't know what your voice was, but I met you as an individual and as a guest. I opened up the book and right out of the gate, let me tell you, your voice is crystal clear. You take your own advice. In fact, I thought this isn't the Paul that I talked to. He's so robustly bold and so decisive and so confident. And I thought, wow, he makes bold decisions in his art, in his advice. And I thought, this is a man of consequence. This is someone you don't want to get into a fight with. I really felt you were like the Rock. You come out with fisticuffs kind of, and you even dial it back. I think the second chapter, you say, okay, I came out kind of strong and now I'm going to give you some positive stuff.
Right.
Is that who is Paul Guyot? Are you this man that we see in front of you, or the guy who wrote the book, or some kind of blend of it? Because when you get behind the pen or a computer, when you're in your element, in other words, I see this fierce lion just running out the gate, and it's almost like maybe a more real you than even the person we're talking to right now. I don't know if that makes sense.
Let me first of all say that's a fantastic question, and I've never been asked that question. So that's great.
That's what we want here, Paul.
That's why we keep Renee around.
That's right. Yeah.
I try to earn my keep sometimes. Yeah.
It's really a great question because it's true. That's my voice, and that's what is so critical, you know, that I talk about in the book. And it is who I am. I mean, you know, we're on a public forum right now. I'm basically, I mean, I'm not pretending or acting or anything, but I'm like all four of us here are going to have a certain filter on because, you know, we're here, as opposed to if the four of us were at a bar or a restaurant just hanging out, the conversation would probably be a little different. But my voice is my voice. And that's the thing I try to get through in the script. It's, you know, if you see Quentin Tarantino interviewed, the way he talks, that's exactly what his scripts sound like. You know, when Aaron Sorkin talks or Shonda Rhimes, it's exactly what their scripts sound like. And that's voice. And to tie it back to exactly what you were saying, that those very kind words about a fierceness and stuff is, to me, the fastest, best way to really start writing in your voice is writing with confidence, complete confidence. And that's what I think you're sensing that comes through. Is I've been doing this so long now, whenever I write anything, I write with confidence. I mean, I'm fairly good at what I do. Look, this is going to sound weird, but I'm better than probably 90% of everybody writing screenplays in the world. But when it comes to professional screenwriters in Hollywood, I'm middle of the pack. Like I'm at best. And it just comes with confidence. The more you write, the better you get. The better you get, the more confident you get.
I like quotes, and you use a lot of quotes, and I also like metaphors, and you use a lot of metaphors. So I'm loving it. But on what you just said, one of the quotes that I had written down was, I trust myself.
Yeah.
Like, you have grown. You're not the same writer you were when you were carrying, what'd you say, your journal and your scribble pad, you know, showing up
and
in
what's
Hollywood.
interesting about that, Em, is this was part of my journey that we can get into deeper later if you want. But to that, when I started out, I'm so thankful. I was so blessed that social media didn't exist, that there weren't all the books and there weren't all the websites and gurus, because I would have never made it. I would have gone right down the rabbit hole of trying to find the hack and the secret and the shortcut. And I didn't have that. So all I did was write. And that's what helped me. And so originally, how I became successful at a young age and started working regularly was people were complimenting my voice, my confidence in my writing, and wow, you write like a veteran. And that led to my career taking off. And then in the middle of my career, and this was because I was such a train wreck as a human being, I started chasing the exterior stuff. I started chasing the credit and chasing the money and the paycheck. And I went from job to job, like just trying to get the most money and the fanciest credit and be relevant and, you know, validation from other people. And that's when I started to get really, really depressed. And it wasn't until a few years ago, I talk about it in the book, when I walked away from NCIS New Orleans, that I started writing like that kid again, where I was just writing for the sheer joy of the process. And that's where I got my confidence back, and my writing started to elevate again.
Yeah, and it's so great because, and I want everyone to go to Tardon Media and check out Paul's, he did a reasonably spontaneous conversation with Dennis Tardon, and it's iconic. It's amazing. I can't wait for number 2. I really can't, because you said something in there that sort of changed my life in a way. You were talking about that, about social media. And, you know, it's like you said something about, you know, your quality of work is not about like how many people follow you or press like, or, you know, those algorithms. In fact, that defeats the whole purpose kind of. And so I was mentioning that to my mother, who's a psychologist, and she's like this famed research, and she studies the brain and behavior. And she just stopped me and she said, well, yeah, you do know that truncates creativity when you're having an exterior force. Like that goes against everything we know about creativity. You have to be able to intrinsically feel something and create innovatively with liberty. Otherwise it's not creativity, like just even psychologically. And I thought, oh my gosh. And so the whole book is like that. If you guys go out there and you read this book, you're going to see that this decisiveness, and he's really advocating. You know, Paul, before we came on, I said, you know, any artist could gain from this book, and that's true. But it also occurred to me, I think any human could, because in a way, there's sort of a psychological or an identity building thing in what you're talking about. You're talking about trusting yourself, being confident with who you are, creating, doing what you want to do, not listening to all these double voices that are just everywhere in the world, not looking for exterior, you know, praise, which means nothing. And you said something also in that interview with Dennis. You go, most of the stuff I write, you said I write every day, and most of the stuff I write will never be published. It's not even meant to be published. A lot of it, it's just doing the work. And I thought, that's me since I'm like a little kid. I'm just writing and writing every day. And I never cared about the end product. We didn't have social media. I didn't like lay out how it's, and that's me. That's my voice. Like that's the person, but we're all forgetting about who we are, right, Paul? Because now everything I do, I'm like, oh, how's this going to play out with the algorithm? How is it going to play out with, it's crazy.
It's crazy. We've been brainwashed. It's chasing the algorithm, and that I think I talked about this with Dennis. It's self-image actualization instead of self-actualizing.
That's what you said. Exactly. I love that.
Yeah. And you also, that makes me think of another quote that was in your book that you quoted, Harlan Ellison saying, that's one of my favorite quotes. You are not entitled to your opinion. You're only entitled to your informed
opinion.
Yeah. That's one of my,
social media
is junkie like you.
Full of uninformed opinions. I mean, that's like the cross that social media lays upon is.
Yeah, you don't have to know anything. You don't have to be an expert in anything now to have a social media account and just claim expertise in something and start having people follow you and even pay you. And, you know, it's just our culture. We're so
or go in and
now. And I don't think I mean, we don't want to get into the weeds of this, but I think it's not a coincidence that is so dominant in our culture, and our society is currently in the biggest disarray it's been in decades.
Absolutely.
I have to agree. I absolutely agree. It's even like when you ask, I've been working really hard with my granddaughter because she's getting older and she's learning, you know, she's forming her own opinions and now is able to really express them and do her thing. And I'm like, please, you sound like you just read that on Google. Like, can you just put that down and I want you to think about what you learned, not just keep
Yeah.
reading what everybody else is saying about it on, TikTok or whatever. And because it's true, that's just rehashes, and we get a lot of debates, and you have people in the comments that are just sabotaging everything. Like, you could go on there being an expert, having your book, and people will be in the comments telling you how you know nothing, and they've never even written
Oh,
an
that's
essay,
happened.
you
Yeah,
know?
that's happened.
I'm
Yeah.
sure. I'm sure it has.
But that's
Yeah.
why I would want to see non-screenwriters
Mm.
read this book. I would want to see non-working artists read this book and do like a takeaway, almost like, it's almost like it's not a self-help book, because I'm not a fan of like self-help stuff. I think that does a lot of, but it really, it made me believe in myself as a human being, which bleeds over into anything else I want to do. If I'm a lawyer too. So like, or, if I want to do lawyering, I feel like there's a lot in this book that was an advocate. Like, I could read it as an advocate. I want to ask you a question that is interesting. Okay. So one of the things in the book that you reiterate again and again is that those other how-to books, and it's not just in screenwriting, there's all these how to write a book, how to do this, how to write a how-to book, anything.
How to
And
write
you
a
say,
how-to book.
and you say, look, these things do harm. They can actually do harm. Why can those types of formulaic books do more harm than good?
Yeah, that's a good question, I've engaged with some people on social media about this, because they've said like, well, Save the Cat's good for beginners or this and that, and the reason, and I think I actually make this analogy in the book, is like, if you want to learn to play golf, and so you go take lessons from somebody who doesn't know how to play golf, and then you go and you practice over and over and over, and every day you're committed, but you're practicing the way this person taught you that doesn't know how to play the game. In a year, you're not going to be any better. You're going to be a year worse than before you started. And
Right.
that's the correlation I make. The analogy is that if these books say, oh, just do this, follow this formula, follow this math equation, and you'll be a screenwriter. And people, I think part of the reason those books are so successful and popular is, one, it's super easy. Everybody wants a recipe.
Right.
And two, it helps people finish. A lot of people, they follow the formula, they finish a screenplay, and they think that book was amazing. But they don't realize that their screenplay looks and sounds and feels exactly like the 10,000 others that were written from the same formula. And that's never going to get you anywhere in this business.
Yeah. Manny, you being a writer as well, I'd be interested on if you could tell us have you read the book yet?
I am embarrassed and ashamed to say I have not, but I'm
That's all right,
but I'm
because I
getting on
am
it. But I'm
vacation.
getting on it.
Manny, we'll wait right now. Go ahead and read it.
Yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
I'll be right back. No.
It's going to be
Give
a
me a couple
long
of minutes.
journey, everybody. Everybody buckle in.
No pressure.
This is going to be a 24-hour journey.
But he did watch the first, episode that we did.
I
So
watched the
he
first
has
episode,
he knows
and
Paul's vibe.
I watched your interview with Dennis, and so yeah, I totally agree with what Renee was saying about it. It's definitely a must watch for anyone interested in writing and just life in general. Yeah, like I began my writing journey as a kid. I was always interested in reading and writing and all that stuff, but I've never pulled the trigger, so to speak, on the next step, and that was actually getting a screenplay in front of somebody who could actually make a movie. So I have a hard disk full of scripts that I haven't done anything with. I did finally publish a novel that I'd been working on for years on Amazon. So so I feel that was accomplished, and me and my partner, we wrote a series, and I illustrated. Well, she and I both illustrated a series of children's books that I have on a website. So I have accomplished some of my writing goals, but I'm still missing that one, and that's the screenwriting one. And like a lot of people, like you said, I also became enamored with all these how-tos, all the different books. I have a few of those as well. And yeah, I gotta admit, I followed the formula. And you're right. It's cookie cutter. It becomes cookie cutter. The best piece of writing advice that I've ever read, at least for me, it's just my opinion, came from, of all people, Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek. And he said that his advice was, as far as trying to come up with an idea, come up with a plot or whatever, he said that every story starts with a need for something to happen or for something not to happen, and that need is tied directly to your main character. In other words, the character has to either stop a bomb from exploding somewhere, or which would be, not to happen, or he needs, $500,000 to pay off a loan shark before he gets killed. In other words, the character there has to be something that he needs to do or needs to stop in order to have some kind of drama happen. And I guess the same thing happens with comedy as well. So that became kind of my paradigm, I guess, for writing for a long time. But after a while, I thought, you know what? I just need to write. I just need to create. And I always start with characters, because to me, if you start with a character, then you can build a world around them. And if you give them a certain profession, then the story, it doesn't write itself, obviously, but it gives you something to go on. If you have a character that's a lawyer, then obviously, there's certain stories that you can tell about lawyers. If he's a doctor, if he's a policeman, if he's an insurance investigator, that's just going to lead down certain paths, and there's so many stories that you can build around that character and those situations. So anyway, so that's become my my methodology, if you will.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree. I mean, everything starts with character for me. I firmly believe plot doesn't exist without character.
Right.
Other than maybe the movie Speed, I don't think there's ever been a story told that had a plot with no character. And and just to sort of yes and what you're saying, like one of the things I'll ask the writers that I work with and mentor and stuff is, what's your script about? Oh, well, it's about this assassin and he's chasing this. And I'm like, no, what's it about? And it's like, well, it's a bank robbery and there's this guy and there's his old boss. And I'm like, no, what's it about? And that's really what writers need to tap into. And I don't mean you have to start here. You start, your process is your process, whatever works. But at some point, if you really want to create the best version of a piece that you possibly can, you have to understand yourself. You have to know, why is it whenever I think of ideas to write, they're in the mystery crime genre, or they're in the romance genre, or what is it about you? Because that's saying something, and that's what you want to tap into, is really, what is your story about? And that's I talk about. In the process chapter in my book, I take the reader through an entire screenplay from concept all the way through the end. And at one point, it was a very plot-rich story. And when I thought it was done, the script was done and ready to go to Hollywood, I sent it to another writer, and God bless him, thankfully, he came back and he goes, I don't care about your protagonist. I mean, it's a great story. It's cool. It's well written. All your supporting characters are great. I don't care about your lead character at all. And I had to step away for 6 months. It was so devastating to me. And then when I came back with fresh eyes, I realized, oh my gosh, he's exactly right. I thought it was about the heist, and it wasn't. It was about fathers and sons and, sins of the father and all that stuff. And I had to tap into that to finally write the best version.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I can tell you right now that I've watched movies or TV shows and I've been like, my husband will be like, "Do you like it?" And I'm like, eh,
Yeah.
because I don't care what happens to any of these people. Like, I want to be invested. I want somebody to lure me in and grab a hold, and then I'm invested. I've got to see. Oh, I need to see what's next. Like, what is
Yeah.
going to happen to him? What is going to happen to her?
One of the
I
things it's
love that.
interesting that you say that, because there was a show on recently. It had its final season this year called Succession that was on HBO, and some people love the show and some people can't stand it. I, as a writer, was obsessed with that show because it was so brilliant from a character standpoint for me, in the sense because there wasn't a single character on the entire series that was likable or that you rooted for. I hated everyone, and yet I couldn't stop watching the show because the characters were so richly drawn. And what's more so than just having a great character in your script is it's about your characters' relationships with each other and to the story. And the relationships on that show were so fascinating and so deep and significant that it was compelling to me, even though I couldn't stand any character I was watching on the show, but I could not miss an episode because I was so compelled by their relationships and,
I think
what it was really about.
Yeah.
I think either emotion, whether you like them or you hate them, but just to have an emotion about them.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and Breaking
You bring
Bad
that
was
up in
that
the
for
book,
me.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
Breaking Bad was like that for me. It was
Yeah.
all these relationships and motivations and unexpected things. Because Paul, you also talk in your book a lot about unexpected things. Take someone by surprise, do something a little bit different. And I think we're talking here again about write what you know. What does write what you know actually mean, Paul? It's not what people think it means, right? There's a little flip here.
Right. And that's why one of my early chapters is called Write What You Know, because it's one of the most debated topics in all the land of writing, whether it's screenwriting, prose writing, essays, short stories, poetry, whatever. And what I say in the book, I start off saying, here's what write what you know does not mean. It does not mean that if you're a lawyer, you should only write shows about lawyers or movies about with legal dramas or thrillers. It doesn't mean if you're a barista, you should only write stories about making or serving coffee. That's not what write what you know means. And that's the mistake everyone makes, is they have that misconception. What write what you know truly means, from back the origin of the phrase, is write what's inside you. Write what you feel, write what excites you, what terrifies you, what you've experienced. And I make the example in the book that you could be a transgender BIPOC teenager living in the desert, and you could still write about old rich white men on Wall Street and write what you know, because you can infuse that story with feeling marginalized, feeling alone, feeling loved without conditions, feel whatever your experience is, whatever you know inside you. When you infuse your writing with that, it's going to make your writing, not only it's going to give you the best story and characters, but it's going to add to your voice and your originality, because nobody knows what you know. We all know versions, like we both maybe know betrayal, but I don't know betrayal like Renée knows it, or Manny. It's like you write what you know is write what's inside you.
Yeah, exactly. Because the rest is research, right? The rest is research.
Exactly.
And
hello Google.
Right. I mean that's part of the fun
quote.
too. Yeah, that's part of the fun. And that's really what you're talking about, feeling emotionally invested, like caring about these relationships, caring about these characters, because otherwise you're going to tune out. Like, what else gets people to keep tuning in and tuning in and tuning in? Just for our audience that is still being introduced to you, can you give us a quick overview of your career? You do that so beautifully in the book, and that does build the credibility. Like, why should people listen to Paul Guyot?
Yeah, so I've been a WGA member since 1999. I've been putting screenwriter on my tax returns for 24 years in a row. during that time, I've written television, I've written features, I've been on staff, I've created pilots, I've run shows. And the point I make in the book about the difference between someone like me writing a book versus somebody that writes a book 20 years after their last screenwriting gig is, in that 24 years I've been doing this, the longest I've ever been out of work is 10 months. So I'm a working professional screenwriter. So my frame of reference isn't 30 years old, like some of the authors of the other books. My frame of reference is how it is right now, as well as how it was 20 years ago, how it was 10 years ago, how it's changed. And I started at the bottom, and I've risen to, like I said, showrunner, producer. I've written giant movies. And so it gives me that informed opinion we talked about earlier. And that's what led me to write this book, and why I'm kind of, I hate even saying this, it makes me so uncomfortable, but like I'm proud of the book, because I feel like it's unlike any book on writing or screenwriting ever written, because I'm, not only do I have that perspective, but I don't really go at it in a how-to way. It's not really prescriptive. It's very much like I deconstruct a lot of stuff, in the first half of the book.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of tell you my experience.
It's like you start in the first part of the book and you're like deprogramming everybody who's read every other book that's out there. I love it. And when you said like it makes you uncomfortable to say that you're proud of what you know or what you've done or your book, but when you're reading that book, I do not sense any
you take
any
no
sense of being
prisoners. Paul
uncomfortable.
takes no
Yeah,
prisoners. I'm telling you. I love that.
absolutely.
And
It's
that comes
fierce.
from
I love
the
it.
audacity. I use that word in a beautiful way, but the audacity that you had to have had that confidence to challenge,
And the
all
name
of
of your
those other
book,
books that are out there.
just
Yeah.
even the
And
name of
to
the book.
go, yeah. And to actually do that. And that's very inspiring. I want to say something. Okay. So Tony Shalhoub, one of my favorite actors, he always said, look, because people said to him, why are you in so many bad movies? How does Tony Shalhoub act in a bad movie? And he said, look, I go out there, I do my job, but there's so much that happens in post. It's teamwork. There's so much that comes together for that. So I'm going to ask you a question that you talk about in your book, which is, can a great script become a bad movie? And does that work in reverse? How important is a script?
Yeah. Well, the script is everything, because, and that's a point I make in the book, is, Hollywood wouldn't exist without the screenwriter. That, what I say in the book is we're the only entity in the entire film and television industry around the globe. Screenwriters are the only entity that creates from nothing, from a blank slate. Everyone else interprets what we create. Directors, actors, cinematographers, music people, everybody interprets what we create. So right there, that's the importance of what we do. And then to answer your question, there's been countless great scripts that have ended up being terrible movies, and tens of thousands of good scripts that became bad movies. Can a bad script become a good movie? I think in a sense. I think there's been some great movies that kind of started out not even with a script so much, the first thing that popped in my head is Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation, where she just kind of had an outline for the actors. And I think it was like 50 or 60 pages. And a lot of that was improv and talking about it in the moment and finding the characters as they went. So that wasn't a script, and that became a pretty great movie. So it can happen in different ways. If you get a script where somebody is like, wow, the script's not very good, but a director or some producer, somebody sees the potential in it, generally they're going to hire a writer or then a bunch of writers and see if they can fix it. And sometimes that doesn't even work, but yeah, they can still find it. But it's much, much more common that a great script becomes a bad movie. And that's simply because there's so many cooks in the kitchen. And it's not even just the number of cooks in the kitchen. It's the problem is each cook has their own agenda. A director has a very specific agenda. Depending on who your actors are, they may have very specific agendas that are all about them and what they're trying to do. you know,
And I would assume, Paul, too, that they have their own voice, right?
yeah, you
They're
know,
trying to, yeah.
editors will have their own agenda, music people will have, and so that's why it happens so often that things get watered down. That's why I say in the book, when professors, you know, in screenwriting classes, you know, they have them watch a movie and then say, here's how the writer did that. And it's like, you have no clue, because how many,
Right.
you know, things that script went through before it ended up in the theater. You can't say that's what the writer wrote. That's why it irks me when I see critics or anybody trashing a screenplay for a finished film, because it just shows me, oh, you really don't know how it works.
Yeah. And you
Yeah, there's
know,
so many.
oh, I'm sorry, Manny.
No, I was going to say, yeah, scripts are they're not written, they're rewritten by different people. You know, somebody will turn in a script, and the studio will buy it, and then they'll bring in another writer to rewrite that script or to polish it or whatever. One of the great examples of a movie that actually came out really good, despite hardly having any script at all, was Casablanca. I mean, they were writing pages the day before they had to shoot. So the actors didn't even know what they were going to do, you know, from one day to the next. I mean, it had a script originally, but then everybody kept rewriting it as they went along. And somehow Casablanca is considered one of the greatest movies ever made. So it's possible, but it's rare.
Yeah. I don't want to give away any spoilers, Renee. I don't know how far. Did you read the whole book?
Yeah, I read the whole book.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away any spoilers because we know Manny hasn't. I don't know if everybody in the audience has, but my absolute favorite chapter was chapter 10.
What's chapter 10?
I loved that. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like, bravo.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was enthralled with that chapter.
Yeah, that's the chapter
You'll
on writer's
figure it out,
block,
Renee.
which is a big subject. Yeah. I spent a lot of time on that too. That was the toughest chapter too.
I bet.
And
I bet.
we do have a question from the audience. Have you seen one of your scripts taken over by a poor director and ruined it? How'd you deal with that? Is there any recourse as a writer?
Why you gotta hate on Geostorm? Come on, Lang.
Just mention it directly, Alana. You know, we know what we're thinking.
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Yes, in fact, yes.
I had that happen on the biggest credit on my resume was I was asked by the person that directed that movie. I worked for him in a television series capacity, and we were wrapping up the season, and he called me up to his office and he said, "Hey, I want to pitch you an idea I have for a movie." And I said, "Okay." And so he didn't pitch me an idea for a movie. He pitched me a concept: satellites control the weather and somebody weaponizes them. And then he pitched me one scene. And because he was my boss, he was the head of the studio, I was like, "That's a great idea, man. I love it." And he's like, "Good. I want you to write it with me." And that led to the most bizarre year of my career, where I think I wrote 14 outlines. I came up with the whole movie. I mean, that's literally all he had. And I wrote 14 different outlines before he approved one. So then we could go to script. I would write the script. It was so bizarre. Like, I'd write a scene and he required me to, as soon as I finished a scene, I had to email it to him, and he was down the hall. And then what I didn't know is he was rewriting my scenes, and he's not a writer.
Yeah.
Anyways, long story short, we sold the thing in a big spec sale, preemptive bidding war. I was very, very blessed that happened. And the studio we sold it to, who paid a fortune for it, had notes, as well they should. And they said, "You got to change this, this, and this." And I thought, those are great notes. And the person who co-wrote it with me and was also the director and also the producer, like the 1,200-pound gorilla in the room, not even 800, was like, "Nope, I love it. We're not changing a word." So that studio said, "Well, then we're not making this movie because it sucks." No. And it ended up in another movie for a whole story we probably don't have time for. And they greenlit it because they owed a bunch of money to Gerard Butler and had to put him in a movie within 90 days or there was hell to pay. That's the only reason that movie got made. And then it just, things got worse from there. And I had to arbitrate against him, my co-writer, just to share credit with him. So not only did he wreck everything, but then he tried to take sole credit for it. And, you know, in hindsight, I probably should have let it happen, but I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if the movie was going to make $1 billion. So the best thing I tell people, the best thing I've ever written in my career was that letter of arbitration, where I spelled out in great detail the work I had done on that thing. And so my prize was, I get to share credit with him. So the answer, yes, that has happened to me. And it happens a lot in television too. When you're not the showrunner, when you're working on someone else's show, that's just part of the gig.
That's a big movie plot. There's a lot of movies about little Sally down the hall doing all the work and Bob in the office taking credit.
Yeah.
Paul, I want to ask you if all art is subjective. You talk about Memento scripts versus blank check script, and you do this whole thing. And I was agog because I said, this is so fresh and cool. You know, no one talks like that. You know, most people, whatever, you know, different strokes are different. Everything is equally valid. And I just thought that was so cool. So talk us through that part of the book for people who haven't read it.
Yeah. So I like I said in the beginning, the first chapter, I start the deconstruction and I talk about why the book's called Kill the Dog, because it's reference to Save the Cat. But there's other reasons too. And I say very early on in the book, page 2 or 3, that, and this is for the people, there are so many disciples and apologists of that book, and yet none of them have had any success as professional screenwriters. I don't know why there's such devotees, but I say, if you believe that Blank Check is a better screenplay to aspire to than Memento, which that book claims multiple times, then I can't help you. And I say, you know, all art is subjective. One person can love a movie, another person can hate the very same movie. But there are some things that go beyond that. Like, people cannot like Hemingway's writing, but he's considered one of the greatest ever because so many people have not only loved it, but it's been dissected and evaluated again and again and again. And there are certain things like that. Memento was nominated for, I think, 12, maybe more screenwriting awards around the world. And it launched Christopher Nolan's career, who is one of our greatest screenwriters. Blank Check, no, did not get nominated for any screenwriting awards, did not launch a career. It simply was a movie that got made because one of the two writers of it, father, worked at Disney. And so yes, all art is subjective. That's why I never say to people like, that movie's terrible or that TV show's terrible. I always say, I don't like that movie. I didn't like that show. Here's why. Because it's subjective. But then there are some things, I think I say in the book, that fall into the category of duh. And there are things that are just, you have to look at something as an adult and go, okay, yes, that's better than that. You know, Memento is a better script than Blank Check or Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. And there's a reason that Christopher Nolan is one of our greatest scribes and has had a massive career since Memento, and the other person never had a career at all.
That's all. I'm soaking it in. I love that entire thing. I also, Hemingway, Old Man and the Sea is my favorite book.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, you know, Hemingway, John Updike, you know, from screenwriters, Frank Pearson, J. Preston Allen, Kurt Ludke. There are, whether you like the films or the scripts or not, there's just some that are considered, yeah, this is brilliant, because when enough people say something's brilliant and critics whose only job is to critique and decipher and dissect all say, you know, this person's great, then okay, you got to understand that.
Yeah, and I love how you also too you make some analogies to visual art, like Jackson Pollock, how he knows he wasn't just dribbling, paint.
Yeah.
That people, a true artist is going to put so much behind the scenes before you get to see the rules that they're breaking, right? And so that's something that I could instantly visualize, where you might not like his art, but you have to respect that there's talent, there's intent behind it. And I think that's one of the things that you're trying to get across is people need to be true to their voice, true to their art. And yes, you might prefer something, but if something is actually groundbreaking, if something is resonating with that many people, pay attention to it and don't just say everything is always equal or whatever. That, again, that was refreshing for me because I think we're getting into a place in culture, particularly with a lot of the online memes and like the self-help stuff that I referenced earlier. It's kind of like a lot of feel good. Everyone has to feel good all the time. Everyone's wonderful all the time. And your voice is not like that at all. Your voice is clear and actually quite comforting. It's like an alpha voice. It's sort of comforting because it also, I think, is going to unleash.
Confident.
It's confident.
Very
and it's
confident.
A leader. And it's like how a leader talks. So it's also something that I think is going to, well, you're going to get backlash for it, but I think you're actually going to, a lot of people are going to have my response, which is like, I feel free now to be who I want to be and to speak that way. What are the responses you're getting? Like good, bad, and ugly, everything in between.
Oh, my favorite one that you put in your book at the very beginning in the reviews. And the guy was like, this book sucks. And then you wrote some guy on the internet.
Yeah, I put that on the back cover. I thought I would head off the pending. Yeah, so I mean, the reason that, I think the subtitle of Save the Cat is the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need. And so the subtitle of my book is the first book on screenwriting to tell you the truth. And, my website's called Screenwriting Truth. And, I learned as a kid, I had a grandmother who told me I'd rather be slapped with the truth than kissed with a lie. And that's just stayed in my brain forever. And as I went along in my career and stuff, and I found all these people that were being just kind of soft pitched to and coddled and, getting the participation ribbons, that's not going to help anyone get better. That's not going to help anyone achieve their goals and find their true north. You've got to tell people the truth. And I try to do it as nicely as possible. If you'd read the early drafts of this book, it was a rant. Like it started out as a rant. And then the more I started to rewrite and pare down, it really turned into a labor of love. But you have to be honest with people. And that's what is slowly slipping away in our culture is everybody's so scared now of offending that it's like, let's just all be nice and say nice things, even if it's a lie. And that actually is worse. That's actually more hurtful. You can tell the truth.
Just in mental health right now.
You can tell the truth without having to hurt someone's feelings,
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
But then as far as the response I've been getting, what's interesting, I actually just made a TikTok about this the other day, is so far I've yet to, and this isn't just the book, this is my whole sort of philosophy on this. I've yet to encounter one professional screenwriter who has disagreed with me in any way or said, oh, actually, I have a different opinion, or, oh, I think you're wrong here. The only backlash I get, most of it's coming from the guru people who I call out in the book.
Right.
Like I went on this Facebook group. It was a screenwriting group, and it had like thousands of members. And it's run by this guy who is a guru. When he tells you, when you go to his site or he tells you who he is and what he does in our industry, it's like George Santos level embellishment. Like he's not a complete fraud, but he's 70% there. And I think my book really scared him because, he made this post in the group that was like, well, here's why the author's wrong about voice. This is actually what voice is in screenwriting. And he was completely wrong. And then he also called me out about formatting. You've got to follow the formatting rules. And again, it's the only backlash I'm getting are from people with no informed opinion, and I I made a comment to somebody in that group. This was prior to that. That guy actually kicked me out of that screenwriting group early on. I had made a comment to somebody who was posting all this stuff, and they were a guru. You know, they wanted people to come to their site and pay them money for their expertise, and they'd never written a thing. And they posted some rules, and I just made a comment as diplomatically as I could. Actually, that's not accurate. Here's the thing. That person and all their friends just came at me. It was like Santa Ana at the Alamo. And what's funny is I've had almost all 5-star reviews on the book. And the next morning after that episode on Facebook, I found there were 2 1-star reviews left, and no writing, no written review, just somebody clicked 1 star, and both of them, you can tell when you're an author there, were done within like 15 minutes of each other. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, that's pretty obvious what it is.
Yeah.
You know, here's the thing, Paul, is I always say, you know, I spent 14 years working with death row prisoners, literally, like people I disagree with how they live their lives. Like, I'm so good at dealing with every personality you can imagine under the sun. There's one personality type I cannot tolerate. I just can't, which is the bean counting personality of, well, the rules say this, and we've got to do it this way, but they're not thinking outside, and they're not thinking about the spirit of the rule. But it's just that, like, I got to tick this box. Like, I want to die. Like, I cannot have a conversation with these people. And so your book was so refreshing again to me, because you're talking about that. It's like formatting and structure and rules and these lesser minds. And I'm going to say that, and it sounds so rude, but it's like people who don't want to dare to be innovative or be creative or actually do anything interesting in the world. It's like they just know how to sit there and sort of just like play whack-a-mole with rules. Well, you can't do that. You can't. And it's like, oh my gosh, who would want to be a part of an industry or be an artist if you had to live like that? And how possibly
the experience
someone would be interested in?
You're so right. It's been a really fascinating experience having this book come out this fall, because I'm a big student of human behavior, and I've really been introduced to some fascinating behavior. And I've learned that there is absolutely a contingent of our society, and especially, and I'm talking within the context right now of screenwriting, the world of screenwriting, but it's also, you can see it's everywhere else, where these people that they are more interested in being seen as being right or validated than learning anything. Like somebody who says, you know, here's the rules, you have to do it this way. If a professional comes to them and says, actually, you know what, you don't have to do it that way. Instead of them going, oh, wow, that's really amazing. Thank you for that insight and knowledge I didn't have. It's immediately, you know, you're a hater, you're bad, go away. And it's like, I've found there's people that all they want to be is right, even if they're 100% wrong. They have no desire to learn anything.
Yeah, it's not about learning. It just has to do with that sort of rudimentary, like, well, someone told me this in 5th grade and I'm going to keep, you know, and you see people making the same mistakes over and over and over again too, because they just get stuck in that rut. They do it that way. And you'll see people say, well, I've done it this way for 40 years. And you're thinking you shouldn't have been doing it that way for 40 years. Like, that's embarrassing because you aren't evolving. You're not changing and you're not thinking for yourself. And a lot of these rules are meant to be changed, you know? I did want to ask you.
A lot of times the people that are doing that, Renee, are the ones like he's talking about where, I did this for 40 years, but then they ended up being a guru because they didn't make any money doing it for 40 years.
Doing it that way.
I mean, we all know, like, musicians and actors and writers and, you know, just a plethora of different communities where there's people who sabotage themselves or sabotage their career or don't listen because they know more. And then they're like, I'm an expert. I've been doing this for 38 years.
Well, that's
I'm
really
not making any
fascinating.
money.
Yeah.
This is what I got from it. I'm you know, when I read Save the Cat, I wasn't even through the first chapter, and I was already feeling the bitterness and the jealousy and the rage in Blake Snyder. Like, he is an angry, frustrated, jealous dude. And then when you look back and look, I researched all these books heavily before I wrote mine. And, you know, when you look at Sid Field's book, which started it all, you know, he was a failed screenwriter. His one of his, I think, 2 credits in his entire career is a movie that has made a bunch of lists as one of the worst movies of the 1960s. And he wrote, I think, 1 other film besides that and never worked again. So 15 years later, wrote a book. Here's how you do it. Robert McKee, the guru of all gurus, you know, who's made millions with his seminars and everything. And Charlie Kaufman mocked him in a movie with Nick Cage. He wanted to be a television writer more than anything. And he had 2 freelance episodes of 2 different TV shows in the 70s and couldn't get hired. So he wrote a book. Blake Snyder, 2 movies made from his father's studios, both of them terrible. He never wrote a thing on his own. The only time he wrote was with another writer, and he kept changing partners because nobody could stand to work with him. He was out of work for 15 years when he wrote Save the Cat. And it's a book of outrage when you really read between the lines. And so many of them, like John Truby, 13 episodes on 21 Jump Street and was fired. And I know this story firsthand because Steve Cannell, the late great Steve, who was a friend of mine, told me this story because Cannell's who hired and fired him. And he couldn't ever work. He couldn't find a gig again. So he started to write how-to books. And so many of them are like that. They're either people that tried, that wanted it so desperately, but they failed and they didn't want to learn and try to get better. Or this whole other bizarre faction, like the Michael Heggs and the Linda Seegers and people who never wrote a screenplay in their life. And yet, you know, Michael Hegg calls himself a story expert because he's watched thousands of movies. So he's an expert.
Well,
Really?
I'm a gourmet chef because I've eaten lots of good food.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like I think I say in the book, I've watched hundreds of hours of Formula One racing. Does that make me qualified to write a book on here's how to be a Formula One driver?
No, but you can be a Formula One driver because you've watched it enough.
Yeah, sure. I could be a heart surgeon, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's amazing to me is that, and again, now our culture, everything's at our fingertips. Nobody wants to learn anymore. Everything's Wikipedia, everything's Google, and yet people will just read something either on social media. Somebody claims to be a story expert or whatever. Nobody does their due diligence to see, like, let me Google this person and really see what their experience is. Right. They just believe it.
Informed opinion. That's where it comes back to informed opinion.
And it's almost like it goes back to that thing. People don't. I've had a couple of people, which I actually really respected, who came to me from TikTok and said, wow, you've really opened my eyes. I was a defender of this book or this person or whatever. And now listening to you, I realize that was wrong. And when I read something like that, I have so much respect for that because that takes courage. That takes courage and it takes self-awareness. And I'm just amazed how little of that there is out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of missed opportunities because a lot of these people, like the ones you're talking about, they don't want to change, but they also had a lot of failures. And instead of turning those failures into a lesson and learning from them, they just thought, well, I'm too good for this. You know, they took it as a positive on their own self and their own ego, rather than maybe I got to learn something here. What am I doing wrong? What am I going to do different? They were just like, oh, I don't fit in. They don't like me, whatever. And I'm going to write a book. I'm going to go eat worms. I'm going to go write a book.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I want to learn every day. Like I still want to learn. I got something from a writer I've been doing this 24 years. They've been doing it less than a year. And I learned something from them this year. Like he taught me something. And I was like, wow, I never looked at that like that. That's fantastic. And it was great because I want to be better every single day. I want to learn as much as I can. And there's this thing, I think it's like the more you know, the more you realize how little you know.
Yeah.
And it's if you're not interested in learning, then it's over.
Yeah, I have to agree. I wanted to ask Paul, what if Manny's still going to read your book? What do you want to tell? What do you want to tell him before he reads it? Is there anything that you like to tell people, like before it came out, or I know you
No.
talk a lot in the book, but he hasn't
Yeah, no,
started it yet.
that's actually good because I just answered the audio book just came out this week, and I was asked the same question by somebody who was interested in the audio book, and they said, what should I expect? What should I get out of this? How should I listen to this? And I said, just have an open mind. And don't come into it. I mean, everybody has preconceived notions about things, but just have an open mind. No matter how many other books you've read, no matter how many rules you believe in and swear by and feel like they've helped you, just consider the source. Like, here's a book written by somebody you've probably never heard talk for 240 pages before about screenwriting. Somebody that has done it and is still doing it at a reasonably high level. So it's just be open to learning, just have an open mind. And look, I encourage people, if anyone doesn't like the book, I tell them, please contact me, tell me, because I want to learn. I would love, and so far nobody has said anything other than, the people we've already discussed that are like 1 star, nobody has come to me and said, hey, Paul, actually, I disagree about this and this. I had one guy did a podcast with somebody, and his thing is he's not a professional screenwriter, but he's an aspiring screenwriter, but he has a podcast he's not trying to tell people how to write, but it's sort of like, hey, here's interviews with screenwriters, or here's reviews of screenwriting software, here's, different things like that. And he actually said to me, I think you're wrong about this particular section. And then when we discussed it, he realized that he had just taken it completely out of context. So when I explained the context to him, he was like, oh, I totally get it now.
Yeah.
So it's like, if somebody doesn't like it, Manny, if you don't like the book, tell me, because I want to get better, okay. And nobody gets better by hearing,
right.
Yeah.
Good job.
Just good stuff.
Yeah. Echo chamber. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you before we go, Paul, Sidney Lumet.
I have that written
and
down.
Niagara Falls. Do you want? You said ask me later, and we're asking you later.
I totally had it written down to say the same thing.
I knew it.
Okay, yeah. So Sidney Lumet, one of our greatest American directors and a great screenwriter. I was very blessed before I became a screenwriter. When I was an aspiring screenwriter, I made a living as a stand-in, and I was Don Johnson's stand-in for a while, his regular guy. So I was part of his entourage and went with him everywhere. And Don did a movie up in Toronto with Sidney Lumet. And I could get emotional, you know me. And Sidney Lumet was absolutely beautiful to me. He realized early on that I was this young kid who was aspiring to be a screenwriter. I think he knew too that I could talk to him about every single scene of every movie he'd ever written, and he just opened himself up to me. I think it was later in his career. It was in the early 90s, mid 90s. And I think he saw retirement on the horizon, and he was just very retrospective about things. And one weekend, we had a 3-day weekend on the shoot, and Sidney invited me. I mean, I'm a stand-in, and he invited me and his assistant and his script coordinator to go from Toronto to spend the day at Niagara Falls. And I just had this beautiful afternoon. I was sitting on the railing, and the other two people were off doing something, and it was just Sidney Lumet and 22-year-old me, or however old I was. And he's just leaning on the railing, and we're looking at the grandeur of Niagara Falls. And I'm asking him about screenwriting, and that's where he said to me, I can make a bad movie from a great script, but I can't make a great movie from a bad script. So he said that. He said the script is everything. And that's how he actually began writing. Is he started out as a director and started writing to try to help himself as a director, because he knew the script was everything. And so that's the Niagara Falls story. I was Don Johnson stand-in, and
great story.
I love that so much, and I didn't know if you were going to answer it, and I thought maybe you were just being facetious or something. And so I'm glad that we asked, and I'm glad, and I think that's the best last. I know we're a little over time, but that was the best way to go out, because it really is a beautiful story. And of course, his career. If you guys don't know who that is, just Google that. Okay, you will be astounded by that man's career. Thank you so much, Paul, for being here a second time. You are always welcome back. There's so much more we didn't get to. I know we all had like more questions and there was more in the audience, but people go out and buy the book, read the book.
Yes, the links are in the description.
Yep.
It looks like that. It's a wonderful book.
It's in the description.
Also, if you go on Amazon, if you read the book, go on Amazon and give a review, because he's rising quickly on Amazon. He wants to try to get him to the top. So leave a message. Don't just hit the stars. Paul has figured out that in the algorithm, you need to leave a message too. Don't just hit the stars. So
if you write a review, even if it's 2 sentences with 5 stars, then the algorithm will recognize it, and maybe we can finally get ahead of Save the Cat.
Yes,
that's right. And one last thing is, Ilana, who's a lawyer, she said if she reads the book and she has criticism, can she contact you even though she's not a screenwriter? Do you accept criticism?
Anybody can. Yeah.
Okay.
I take it from anybody. Yeah.
So anybody, so there you go, Ilana. If you find something you disagree with, he's there. But let me tell you, Paul, in another life, you would have made a great lawyer. You're a great advocate. You're absolutely stunning. You would have been like a Johnny Cochran.
I have to be honest. I was not expecting.
No, I wasn't. I was not. I was
after meeting you, and you were wonderful. You were awesome, educated, smart, willing to talk, share everything. You did amazing, but
you're tough.
Just that first, like, you came out with guns blazing.
You came out swinging. You're a cowboy.
I loved it.
Yeah,
because that's how I pretty much live. And most of these people tell you.
You kind of channeled here. Yeah, you. Thank you for so much, everybody. Thank you, Em, for introducing us all to Paul. Thank you, Manny, for hosting.
Manny, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Have an excellent evening, everyone. Good night.